Hello and welcome to Ray of Light, the podcast about reading, writing and happiness with myself, Eleanor Ray. I write books that are about finding light in the darkness, and it's a special week for me because the paperback of See the Stars is out on Thursday. I'm so delighted to introduce my guest today. She is one of the world's most successful contemporary thriller writers, an international bestseller with more than 10 million copies of her novels sold in over 40 languages around the world. Ruth Ware, welcome to Ray of Light.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on publication of See the Stars. That's so exciting.
Well, thank you very much. Your most recent book is a follow-up to a novel that became hugely successful and was recently adapted on Netflix, starring Keira Knightley. How did it feel to see your novel played out on screen?
Oh, I mean, so surreal. In a really good way. But yes, it's a very strange feeling to sort of see actual flesh and blood human beings saying lines that, once existed only inside your head and walking around settings that you imagined and, dreamt up in your spare room. So yes, very, very strange feeling. Sort of a bit like having a superpower. I imagine when I
Yes.
walked onto set, I was like, oh my goodness, I dreamt all of these people into existence. Yeah, it was a very surreal moment in the best possible way.
That's amazing. It must feel so exciting. Now, I've recently finished the follow-up, The Woman in Suite 11. I couldn't put it down. I absolutely loved it. I found it utterly transporting as well as very, very gripping. For anyone who might not have read it yet, can you describe it for us?
So it is a follow-up. It's a standalone novel in the sense that the mystery is completely self-contained. You don't need to have read Cabin 10 for it to make sense. But I think if you are considering reading both of them, start with Cabin 10 because there are some inevitable spoilers. So in Cabin 10, we meet Lo Blacklock, who is a travel journalist, and she's been invited on this kind of enviable once-in-a-lifetime trip to go on this boutique cruise ship, see the Northern Lights, do some hobnobbing. Needless to say, things don't go completely to plan. She wakes up one night certain that she's heard someone disappearing overboard, but when she raises the alarm, the ship tells her that no one was ever in that cabin and none of the passengers are missing. Obviously, that turns out not to be the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't have much of a book. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that, Lo is proven right in many ways about her suspicions. In Suite 11, we meet her 10 years on. She's settled down, she's had kids, she's moved to America, which is where we leave her at the end of Cabin 10. And she's living there with her now husband. And she's taken some time out to write a book about her experiences on board the boat in Cabin 10. And she's sort of trying to get back into the travel journalism game, trying to kind of get back on the horse after having kids and taking some time out. And it's proving a bit tougher than she'd been hoping. So one day she gets an invitation in the mail to attend the opening of a luxury hotel in Switzerland. And she thinks, great, what a brilliant opportunity. I could do some travel journalism, visit my mum, who I haven't seen for a while. And so she pitches the piece, and quite a lot of people get back to her to say, look, I don't think we'd be really interested in a puff piece. But what we might be interested in is an interview with the hotel's billionaire owner, Marcus Leidman, who is very reclusive, very private, and very rarely gives interviews, but will be at the opening of this hotel. So Lo goes along with this in mind. She really wants to secure an interview with Marcus. And one night, in the middle of the night, she comes back to her room and finds a note on the pillow saying, please come to Suite 11 as soon as possible. And she knows that this is Marcus's suite. So this is her chance, but she's aware that it's not the best idea for a lone female traveller to go off to, a strange man's suite in the middle of the night. But she also knows that she might not get another opportunity. So she girds her loins, finds Suite 11, knocks on the door, and what she finds there is a spoiler. So people will have to read the book.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. You set that up so beautifully for us there. What made you decide to go back to Lo's story after all these years, see what happened to her 10 years on, put her through the ringer again, perhaps?
Through the ringer, I know, right? Well, I think that's a big part of why it took me 10 years to go back. In Cabin 10, I really do put poor Lo through the ringer.
You do.
She's gaslit. She's half drowned. She nearly dies a couple of times. She's, put through pretty much every sort of terrifying experience. So I guess I did feel like she deserved a little bit of a rest after the events of that book. I sort of feel like it's plausible for one terrible life-changing event to drop in the lap of an ordinary person. Unfortunately, we see that all the time. But for that to keep happening to someone who's basically just a regular, ordinary person just seems a little bit unlikely. You's House would have to come up with some reason why they would keep encountering these events over and over again. And when I got that eureka moment, that was when I knew that all the pieces had fallen into place. But I think a big part of it was just having left enough time that I wanted to, to find out how Lo had changed and what kind of a person she was now. And that was one of the great joys of going back to the book, not only getting to write a really fun story, but getting to see how a character that I loved had changed and grown up in the intervening years.
Yes, and how she'd been affected by what happened the first time round as well. You don't gloss over that she had this traumatic experience, and she's still kind of struggling with the reverberations of it 10 years on, which I thought you did really skillfully there. And I loved meeting some of the other characters again as well, and seeing what's happened to them and seeing them reunited. I thought
Yes, there's
that was
definitely
really
some
fun.
fun Easter eggs, some fun kind of guest
Yes.
appearances. That was really fun to write. But you're so right. My books often end sort of just at the point of resolution, where they're often not a completely happy ending. I mean, how could it be? Somebody has died. But there is usually a sense of sort of everything is tied up and kind of finished. And of course, in real life, that's not the end. Just because you've solved a crime, it doesn't mean that everything is okay, that everybody goes back to normal. And so, yes, that was a really important part for me of Sweet 11, was showing sort of how those events would keep affecting you years and years on. And I think, we often give thriller characters quite a hard time. I often see it in reviews, people making poor choices or not, doing the right thing. And I always think, gosh, if I went through half of what these main characters do, I would be an absolute nervous wreck. I wouldn't be out there solving crimes. I'd probably be sobbing in the corner of my bedroom. So I will, Lo's a much tougher person than me in many ways, and much more invested in doing the right thing. I would probably be the person who heard a splash from the next door cabin and rolled over and thought, oh, well, security will deal with that. Whereas Lo is the kind of person who absolutely will not leave, let it go. But
she does, and I think that's what we really love about her as well. She's like has this determination to do the right thing, which
it does sometimes
really enjoyed in both
tip over into a sort of slight saviour complex, but mostly I think she keeps it on the right side.
Brilliant. Now, one thing I loved about both the books is you've got this wonderful mix of this luxury setting, which is so well told. It really took me there. But real psychological tension as well. What do you think it is about that juxtaposition that resonates so well with readers?
It was a very deliberate decision on my part. When I wrote my first book, In a Dark, Dark Wood, which is about a murder on a hen night, it's not in nearly such a, an enviable setting. It's in a nice house in the middle of the Kielder Forest in Northumberland, but it's sort of fundamentally just a house. And when the reviews started to come out for that book, it started to get comparisons to Agatha Christie, which I had not been expecting. And so with my second book, which was Cabin 10, I had the choice to kind of either pull away from those comparisons or lean into them. And I chose to lean into them. I absolutely love a luxury hotel. It's my great weakness. And I have felt, more pampered in hotels than almost anywhere else. But I have also felt more scared. And there is something about being in what is not quite a private place, but also not quite a public place. You're sleeping somewhere where several, maybe dozens of people have a key to your room. They're coming in and out while you're not there. It's not really a private place in the same way that your home is. And that thing of waking up in a strange room in the middle of the night and hearing a sound that sounds like it could be in your room, and your heart is racing, and then you suddenly realize it's fine, it's just someone coming back drunk in the middle of the night to their hotel room. I have been more terrified in hotels, I think, than almost anywhere else. So I think for me, they felt like a great setting in terms of that sort of tipping point where something can go from being absolutely luxuriously brilliant to absolutely terrifying in an instant.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, next time in a hotel, I'm going to think about that. Thank you.
Well, the funny thing is, when I started out writing the book, I sort of thought, oh, these fears are kind of, they're mine, but, they're kind of completely irrational. And the more people talked to me in the Q&A and in the, signing lines, the more absolute horror stories I had about people being, checked into hotel rooms that were already full, people walking into their rooms in the middle of the night, they were in the shower, they were asleep, people, and I've got dozens of them now, and it now seems to me completely incredible that no strangers have ever walked into me in the middle of the night.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you started off your journey to publication?
I was always a storyteller, right back to when I was a really small kid. And I was, telling tales to my little sister about our teddy bears and our Barbie dolls. And as I got older, those got longer and longer and more elaborate. And I started writing them down until eventually, by the time I was in my teens, I was writing what were effectively novels, not very good ones, but they were, novel length with a start and a middle and an end and a plot.
Wow.
But I never really tried to get them published. And I think a big part of that was that, my family were just really ordinary middle class working family. My dad was an IT manager for the local council, and my mum worked in accounts for the library services. And we didn't know anybody who made their living in a sort of creative way. Certainly didn't know any writers. And so it just felt like writing novels was something that other kind of more special people did, and not an ordinary person like me. I loved books. I was a complete bookworm. I always wanted to work in the book industry. So I worked as a bookseller for a while and then went to work in the publishing industry. And it was really amazing in terms of it gave me a really good insight behind the scenes, really good understanding of how good a book has to be to, to clear all the hurdles.
What did you do in publishing? Were you
I was
an
a
editor?
publicist.
Oh, a publicist. Okay.
Yeah. Didn't make me any better at publicising my own book, sadly. It's still absolute agony, talking about things. But I think it also gave me this huge attack of stage fright because I was working with these incredible writers, prize-winning writers, really sort of internationally acclaimed people. And so the books at home on my computer just felt even more sort of inadequate, I guess, and unpolished and hard to sort of hold up. So for years and years, I didn't do anything with my writing. I carried on writing, but I didn't pitch it to anybody. I didn't try to get published. I just sort of kept writing these books and putting them under the bed. And it was really having kids that made me realize that if I didn't do something with my writing, I wasn't going to be able to do this really for the foreseeable future, because I had these two very small kids. I was about to go back to work in a pretty demanding job, and I suddenly thought, if I don't manage to sell a book so that I've got enough money to get a little bit of extra childcare or cut down on my day job a little bit, I'm just not going to have time to do this until they're sort of 5 or 6. And it was that made me think, right, I have to get over my nerves. I have to pitch this to an agent. So I did. And that's my first published book.
Interesting. That's funny. I went through a similar experience. I didn't have a publishing related day job. I worked in marketing for an investment company, and I was writing in my spare time. And then I was lucky enough to get a book published. It's under a different name. It's a small cozy crime series. And I thought, oh yeah, I can do my day job and then I can write a bit in the evenings. And then I had kids. I had 2 kids in quick succession, like you, it sounds. I had 2 under 2. And when I was pregnant with the second, I was like, I'm not going to be able to write anymore and work. And I need to work because I need to earn money. And I've got these books, but it's a low level deal. It's never going to be something that I can quit for. And then I started a new book while I was on maternity leave with my second child that became Everything is Beautiful. And that was the one that fortunately sold well enough for me to quit the day job. And now I write and have the kids. Whereas otherwise, yeah, it's not feasible to do all 3, I think. Hats off to anyone who manages it. Now, so you got your agent. What happened then? Did it go quickly from then? Because what I've heard quite a lot is people take years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, all at once. How did it happen for you?
It was, to an extent. So getting my agent was not super straightforward, in spite of having worked in publishing and knowing, lots of sort of how the editing process worked. I did the classic mistake of just writing a novel and then literally pressing print and sending it out there. And it got rejected. I sent it to kind of half a dozen agents and they all asked for the full. So I knew that the premise was good, but ultimately they all rejected it. And so it sort of forced me to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, clearly there's something here, but I haven't quite nailed the execution. So I joined an online writing group. I shared it with some friends. I took feedback and I went back and re-edited it, sent it out again. And this time I got a lot more interest. And one of the agents was my amazing now agent. But that was a YA novel. So my first, like you,
Okay.
I sort of had two kind of paths. My first novel that I published was YA, and I wrote 5 books for
So young adult, for
teenagers.
anyone who's listening who
Yes.
doesn't know that term.
Yeah, the kind of 12 to sort of 16 age bracket in books. And that was amazing. I loved writing for teens. They're incredibly tough audience in the best possible way. You know, if they love your book, they will tell you so. If they think your book is a steaming pile of you know what, they will also tell you that, probably to your face. So it was very good training. But then I had an idea for a book just out of the blue that I really, really wanted to write. And it could not possibly be YA. So I had this, came from having a meeting with a friend, coffee with a friend, and we were talking about thrillers. She's a thriller addict. I am and always have been a thriller addict. And we were talking about books that we'd loved, books that we'd recommended. And I don't know if she'd just been on a hen night or if she was going on a hen night, but she said, you know, I would love to read a thriller set on a hen night. And I suddenly thought, I would love to read that. And I don't think it exists. And then I thought, maybe I should write it. But of course, the problem was that a crime novel set on a hen night could never be for teenagers. There's not really any way of massaging that concept to fit with kind of 14-year-olds. So I went back to my agent and I said, I've got this idea for a novel and I'm really excited to write it, but there's no way it can be for teens. And I thought she would say, stick to what you know, you've got a really great publisher, you've got an audience that you've spent a lot of time building up. But she didn't. She said, well, give it a try. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we'll go back to the drawing board. So I wrote that book and it became In a Dark, Dark Wood. And it just broke out in a way I had never expected and sold, as you said at the beginning, kind of 40 countries, got a US deal. Reese Witherspoon loved it, got a film deal very quickly. So that was sort of the point when my career suddenly went in a way that I had never anticipated.
And you know what? I think when I read your novels, I can see a little bit of the young adult heritage in them because there's no lulls, there's no boring bits, I suppose. Because when I read stories with my kids, very quickly they're not at that age yet, but very quickly, if there's something a little bit dull or if there's a bit too much explanation or description here, they've turned off. They don't want to read it anymore. And your books don't have that. Do you think that's skill you learned from writing for younger people that you bring into your adult books?
I mean, I think absolutely. It's exactly as you say, and teenagers even more so in a way, because small children, they want to be with you. If you're reading them a story, they're probably going to sit and listen, even if their attention wanders. Whereas teenagers, they've got their friends, they've got their phones, they've got Netflix. You have to compete so hard for their attention. If they're going to sit down and read, it has to be something they really, really want to read. But it is interesting because I don't think I write super, super differently for teenagers than I do for adults. But when I was writing for teenagers, all of my edits were always cuts, virtually. There would be a few additions, but I'd say 99% of them would be about making the story leaner and more streamlined. Whereas when I write for adults, almost all of my edits are additions. It's all about, making the story richer and deeper and fleshing out the characters. So yes, there's not a wasted word in teen fiction, and perhaps I allow myself a little bit more breathing space for adults. But I think those lessons of, give the reader a reason to turn the page, show them that there is something worth waiting for here, that very much stuck with me from writing for kids. Yeah.
Really comes through. So talking of writing in general, what do you love the most about it? You started when you were very young and it's something you've been doing in your spare time, whether you had spare time or not, and now you're obviously a full-time writer. What do you love about it?
My gosh, I mean, what's not to love? Really, for me, I guess writing for me is very close to reading. It's a very similar pleasure. It's just, it's kind of reading on steroids, I guess, because you get to choose the world, you get to choose the characters, you get to choose the action, you get to live in this, amazing place that exists only in your imagination for a year. That's about how long it takes me to write my books. So I live with these people, I fall in love with them, I wander around their universe for a whole year. And that still feels like just the craziest form of magic to me, that I get to do that and get paid for it. But I think, in terms specifically of the kind of writing I do, crime writing, I think my favorite thing about it is probably just how much of a kind of dance with the reader it is. And, that's true for all books. You're always writing with the reader in mind and thinking about what they're hoping and feeling. But I think crime doubly, triply so, because it is a dance between you and the reader. It's you setting the reader a puzzle, offering them the clues, trying to mislead them, trying to pull the wool over their eyes. And the reader is doing the same. They're trying to figure out what does this author want me to notice? What are they hiding from me? What are they trying to convey here?
I wanted to talk about the mysteries in your books because they are beautifully crafted. It's exactly what I want from a mystery. I want the solution to be a surprise, but when you go back, there's enough there that you think, actually, if I'd really had my wits about me, I could have figured that out, but I didn't. That's exactly how I want my mysteries to be. And we've talked about Agatha Christie as a comparison before, and that's exactly what she does. And I think you've got that similarity between your work. What do you think the secret is to creating a mystery that's so compelling? Any tips?
Well, I love the question because that is exactly what I'm trying to do. And I don't know if I always get it right. But as you say, that is the huge pleasure with sort of, particularly that kind of Christie-ish sort of crime where when you get to the end, you don't feel blindsided, you don't feel cheated, you feel like the solution was right there in front of you if you had only had the wit to spot it. And it's incredibly difficult to do. I would say, in terms of constructing the actual mystery, I start from kind of two places. I think about the beginning a lot, I think about the characters a lot, I think about the setting a lot before I ever start writing. So hopefully the world feels pretty rich and fully realised right from the get-go. But I also think about the end, and I usually find I can't start writing until I know the end. And I think, from a sort of setting up the mystery plotting sort of point of view, that for me that's pretty essential. So I think for me that's the two ingredients that I try really hard to concentrate on. One is the sort of the structure, the whodunit, and the kind of logistics of that. But the other is, just creating characters that people want to root for.
Really glad you said that because that was exactly what I was going to ask you about next. What I loved in Sweet 11, brilliant mystery, but it's not just about the plot. It's about those kind of emotional truths, and it's about characters, and they're characters that we want to hang out with, preferably on luxury cruises as well. And that's something that I explore in my books as well. Everything is Beautiful, for example. It's a character-based novel, but there's mystery there. So this one is about a hoarder who uncovers the clue to her past underneath her towering possessions. And so it's a slow reveal of what's been buried and what led her to hoard in the first place. And I think that kind of character and that mystery, those two elements sit really nicely together. My favourite character, and I can't ask you too much about her because I don't want to give spoilers, but I love Carrie. Can you tell us a little bit more about her as a character, maybe, and how you came to create her? I thought she was fascinating.
This is really difficult to talk about without spoilers, but I loved Carrie. I loved writing her in Cabin 10. She's probably the character that I get the most questions about. And I think I'm not super interested in people who are complete goodies or complete baddies. She's about as far on the sort of goody end of the spectrum as I ever write, but she's flawed. She's very imperfect. She does stupid things. She makes decisions that I certainly wouldn't do. And she's very much at the grey end of the spectrum, to put it politely. And I love reading about those characters. She's one of my favourite characters that I've written, and I adore her.
Now, this is always one of my favourite parts of the podcast. Can you recommend a book that you've loved recently that maybe hasn't had the spotlight it deserves? Perhaps not yet.
A great question. And part of the difficulty with this is that I'm often reading books far in advance of publication. So they very often haven't had the spotlight yet, but that's just because they have not been published. But a book that I read recently and loved, in fact, I quoted on it, was The Hiding Season by AC Glass. And it's a kind of cat and mouse chase. It's about a woman who gets mixed up in probably a murder. It's all very unclear. She's just it's one of those kind of ordinary people, terrible thing falls into their lap plots that I was talking about earlier. It's a really fun read, had a good twist in the tail. So I think that'll be out sometime in 2026. So I highly recommend people keep an eye out for that.
Thank you very much. We'll all look out for that one. We've got readers listening. We might have aspiring authors as well, some people who are maybe starting out on their writing journey. What advice would you give them?
Well, I always feel like a complete fraud giving advice because I don't feel like I have figured this out remotely. So who am I to tell others how to do it? In fact, that's, one of the great terrors of this career is I don't know about you, but every time I sit down at my computer to start a new book, I think, wait, how did I do this last time? How am I expected to do this again? So
Exactly
I
the
don't
same. And I have to say, every guest we've had has pretty much said that same
said
thing.
the same
So
thing.
you're not alone.
Well, okay, let's assume the imposter syndrome and ignore the fact that I probably don't know what I'm talking about. I think I would say, well, number one is probably to self-edit as much as you can. Going back to my early mistakes, it's really difficult to self-edit. You don't know what the gaps are in your own understanding of
Yes.
your work until someone else points them out. But joining a writers group is a really good start. And for me, the feedback that I got on my book was interesting and valuable and useful. But actually, the more valuable skill that it taught me was, obviously to get critiques, you have to give critiques. And critiquing other people's work sharpens your eye no end for the errors in your own. And it was astonishing how many times I would pick up something in somebody else's work and say, you might want to look at this, or I felt this. And then I would go back and see the exact same thing in my own work. So I think that really helped me. Number two, I would say is, going back to what we were talking about earlier, give readers a reason to turn the page. One of the great pleasures as a writer is knowing that a cool thing is coming, and there can be great pleasure in withholding that. It's sort of like when you've got an amazing Christmas present for someone and you're so excited, but part of the joy comes from the fact that they don't know what this Christmas present is. And the problem is with readers is if they don't know that something is coming, they don't know that there's a cool thing around the corner and that they should keep reading.
Yes.
So what feels incredibly anticipatory for you as a writer may just feel boring to them as a reader. So you don't have to spoil all the big reveals up ahead of time, but it's really good to find little tips and tricks for sort of signaling to the reader, like, don't worry, cool stuff is coming. And you'll notice that a lot of thriller books have kind of flash forward prologues or little bits of foreshadowing. And that's often an easy way to say to the reader, don't worry, we're getting to the point. There's going to be a murder here. But I think the final thing, and maybe the most important, is to just have fun. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. And that's a lesson that I try really hard to stick to with every single book. And every book for me is a kind of complicated process of persuading myself that nobody else is ever going to read this and that I can make as many mistakes as I need to, write as many infelicitous phrases as I need to, as many cringeworthy scenes that no one else will have to see. And it's only when I get to the end that I sort of start to try and lick it into a shape that I would be happy for other people to read. So yeah, write with a bit of fun and a bit of fearlessness in your heart.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And what is next? What are you working on at the moment? What can we look forward to?
I actually don't have one coming out in 2026, so I'm not quite at the stage where I can talk about it yet, but I'm having enormous fun writing it. It's a little bit dark, a little bit gothic, a little bit folk horror, and I'm having a blast. So yeah, I can't wait for people to read it.
Now, Ruth, Thank you so much. It's been such a joy talking to you. The Woman in Suite 11 is out now in paperback, and I think anyone who loves immersive settings and clever, character-driven mysteries will absolutely adore it. And if you enjoy stories that are ultimately about hope, connection, finding light when life feels overwhelming, you might like my latest novel too, which is called See the Stars, and it's out in paperback this week. So thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, follow, or share with a fellow book lover. We'll see you next time on Ray of Light for more tips on reading, writing, and happiness.